Well, yesterday, Petros Papadakis told us that the LA Clippers had an Egyptian curse on them. And that's the only way to explain how they blew leads of 15, 19, and 12 in giving up a 3-1 series lead. And the Clippers are now 0-8 all-time with a chance to clinch a conference finals berth, according to data that is 8 straight losses, longest streak in NBA postseason history. And Doc Rivers has now coached 3 different teams that have blown a 3-1 series lead. If you were looking for someone to decide to hang this on, I would say the biggest losers when it comes to the Clippers' loss. Number one, the NBA. They are in trouble. Nobody is watching this league at all. Their ratings have collapsed. The whole bubble in general has not captured the American interest with all of the social justice warriordom. By far, the biggest loser is the NBA. Second biggest loser, I think, is Paul George, who it's going to be hard to overcome how bad he was in Game 7 and just the disappearing act in the playoffs in general. And then I would say the third biggest loser is Doc Rivers. In terms of the biggest winner, I think it's the Nuggets, but I think close behind is LeBron James because the Lakers are going to be in the NBA Finals and they're going to be able to win a championship without really, potentially, having to beat very many good teams because, look, the Nuggets deserve credit for coming back from 2 3-1 series deficits and just basically refusing to quit. Murray and Jokic have been a heck of a combo but between the two of them. But in general, I think, and I'm just saying this to be honest with you on this show, we're going to cover the NBA playoffs on this show 1/100th as much as we covered them when it goes on in April, May, and June, and there's no competition for the NBA. And now you're going to have, and we're going to get to this in a minute, college football. You've got so much going on in the world of the NFL. You're going to have a bubbled up, expanded Major League Baseball postseason, which I think is going to do really well. And all of those things are going to create a lot more interest. Plus, remember, I think a lot of you are like, wait a minute, oh yeah, that's going on. The U.S. Open in golf starts tomorrow. So in addition to all of the other things that are going on, I think a lot of you are like, wait, what's going on? Yeah, the U.S. Open that was moved back from June is going to be taking place starting tomorrow. So I think this was the only way that the NBA was going to be able to cut through the noise was if they were able to have the Lakers and the Clippers playing against each other. Congratulations to the Nuggets and the long-suffering Nuggets fans. It's been a long time since you guys have been in the Western Conference Finals. But I think a pinprick as many people are going to care about the Lakers playing against the Nuggets. And I don't really think that many people care about the Heat versus the Celtics either on the Eastern Conference side. If LeBron James somehow lost to the Denver Nuggets, I think that Adam Silver would just wrap himself in chicken cutlets and walk into one of the lakes in Orlando and let himself be devoured by alligators, because then there would be an unbelievable all-time low. If the Nuggets ended up playing against the Heat in the NBA Finals at the same time as the NBA, college football, and the Major League Baseball playoffs are all going, it would be an unmitigated disaster for the NBA. And frankly, I think the NBA is already in a series of unmitigated disasters. That is what is going on there. I'll bring in the LA crew to get their reaction here in a minute. The other news, the Big Ten is just, I don't even know what they are doing at this point in time. I told you on Saturday what the plan was for the Big Ten, that they wanted to come back on October 17th and play 8 or 9 games before they got to their conference title game on December 19th, that they could hopefully then get a team into the college football playoff because the college football playoff selection committee makes decisions on December 20th. We are now entering into a third full day since the Big Ten met on Sunday. I don't know what they are waiting on to make that announcement. The Big Ten continues to spin the drama there as the Nebraska president came out, didn't realize his mic was hot, and said the Big Ten was announcing the return of football on the yesterday evening. And then they didn't actually do it. So, again, I don't know exactly what is going on there. They need to, based on everybody that I'm talking to, they need to announce the return of the Big Ten by today. They need to, on Wednesday, at least come out and officially announce that the Big Ten is coming back and that they want to start play on October the 17th that weekend. So that is what's going on in the Big Ten. Now, a lot of you out there have been saying, hey, Clay, you fought hard for the Big Ten to be able to play, and I never would have anticipated, and probably a lot of you think this is crazy, oh my goodness, Clay Travis would end up being the biggest advocate in all of the country for the Big Ten to play, but 2020 definitely creates some strange bedfellows indeed. That is what is going to end up happening, is the Big Ten is going to play. And I want you guys to remember, if you listen to this program, how many people out there ridiculed the idea of the Big Ten playing football this fall when the White House got involved and tried to help. How many people who are in the sports media, the Corona Bros in the sports media, said there's absolutely no way that the Big Ten is going to be able to play this fall. Go back and pay attention to this. I've tried to be straightforward, just sharing with you what I was hearing, and the truth of the matter is I have, and Outkick has been, the most reliable media source in all of the sports media. I believe this, for what's going to happen in the Big Ten, and certainly we have been the most zealous and fighting for the Big Ten to actually end up playing. Well, the Pac-12 finally has picked up the flag and started to wave it around, with a lot of players saying, wait a minute, why in the world are we not going to be able to play? There are college football games taking place everywhere, and that's before the SEC starts play next week with all of their games as well, which is really, for many people, going to feel like the official start of the college football season. And the SEC is not just playing, they are playing with fans present in 13 of their 14 stadiums. Only Vanderbilt's not going to have fans present, and there's certainly a joke there, and I can say this as a double graduate school alum from Vanderbilt University. There certainly are already and always issues with social distancing at Vanderbilt football games. Vanderbilt was social distancing for football games long before it was cool to social distance at football games. So the Pac-12 now starting to argue that they should be allowed to come back. And they actually have called out the governor of California, the governor of Oregon. They're starting to realize that the reason they aren't playing is not health related. It's all political. And after seeing the Big Ten fight their way, thanks to the players, the fans, the coaches, all of the people who have fought so hard for the Big Ten season to end up happening, the Pac-12 players are now looking around and saying, wait a minute, why are we not able to play as well? And I think what you're going to end up with in the Pac-12, unfortunately for Pac-12 fans, is they're going to come back and play, but they're going to come back and play so late that there's really no point in them playing a season. The Pac-12 will play a season against itself, but it'll happen in November and December and January, and people will be saying, well, what's the entire point of this? Because the college football playoff is really the only reason to play. If the Pac-12 had any leadership at all, they would do what they did when they canceled the season back in August and just copy whatever the Big Ten decides to do. And so if the Big Ten is coming back on October 17th, to be honest, the Pac-12 should find a way to come back on October 17th as well. I don't think they have the political capital or the wherewithal to make that happen, but that's what they should do if they were actually making solid decisions. All right, so that is where we are in the universe of sports news. I think we have a couple of calls last night from the NBA. Here is the final call from both the Nuggets, obviously rejoicing, and from the Clippers as they recognize here is another year. Hello, darkness, my old friend. 0-8 in chances and opportunities to advance to play in the Western Conference Finals. Nuggets first.
The Denver Nuggets, for the fourth time in franchise history in the Western Conference Finals. 104-89 is the final. Nuggets Nation, let's go!
The shot clock turned off. P.J. Dozier has it in, and he will bring it across the timeline and dribble out the clock. The Clippers go up 3-1 on the Denver Nuggets and drop the final 3 games of this best-of-7 series.
So that is the call. The Clippers lose. The Nuggets advance to play against the Lakers. By the way, we barely mentioned it, but in the Eastern Conference Finals, the Miami Heat found a way to beat the Boston Celtics, and the Celtics basically every time they're in a close game. I mean, they lost on that dagger 3 by the Raptors with 0.5 seconds left. They lost Game 6 in what was it, like double overtime? And now they lost this game against the Heat in overtime. That is 3 pretty devastating losses where you would expect for there to be some balancing out of tough losses. We have not seen it for the Celtics there. All right, let's go out to L.A. I know that there is exultation in the streets for Laker fans, but don't you, Danny G, acknowledge that in terms of the overall NBA, the Clippers losing is bad? Because, I mean, if you're a huge Laker fan, yes, you're more likely you're 6.5-point favorites over the Nuggets to actually be able to advance. But I just don't think anybody's going to care outside of Denver and a few Laker fans. I don't think people are going to be like, oh, I've got to schedule my my day around making sure that I can watch the Nuggets and the Lakers play. I think this is bad for the NBA.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I would even admit as a Lakers fan that I would have loved to see that matchup. But, hey, you hate to see it. That's one of the reasons why I wondered why the Clippers carried themselves on the court the way they did all year. They seemed as if they were already champs or that they had championships under their belt already, especially Harrell and Beverly talking all the smack they did all throughout the season. Their team was just not very likable, and I think what it boiled down to was chemistry. Kuz talked about it on the SVP show last week, how the Lakers actually get along, and some of those players that were shipped off to the Pelicans back in just a few years ago for the Lakers, their squad didn't have cohesiveness. They weren't getting along off the court. This season, you could tell that the Laker team, they actually get along and like each other. The Clippers, only when they were winning, it seemed like they could kind of stand each other or gel. Whenever they had a big loss or were losing, they weren't getting along. They had bad chemistry. You could tell in their body language. And then the fact that Doc Rivers could not get the best out of them and pulled another disappearing act when he was up 3-1 in a series. It was all bad for the Clippers, but yeah, for Laker fans rejoicing on Twitter and just NBA fans overall taking over Twitter, it was like a shockwave through the sports world. First, everybody piled on Doc. Then everybody got on Kawhi and PG-13 for disappearing because, I mean, Jamal Murray had 40 points. Kawhi and PG-13 combined had 24. If you would have told me that was what was going to happen in Game 7, I would not have taken that bet. Although I was watching you and your co-hosts on FS1 yesterday, you all seemed uncomfortable picking the Clippers. You did, though. You picked the Clippers, but you were uncomfortable picking them.
Yeah, I didn't like them to cover the 7.5-point spread because they'd given up all those double-digit leads over the past week or whatever it is. And I think a lot of people didn't even really pay attention to that series. And what I mean by that is the Clippers went up 3-1, and then I'll give you an example. I bet the Clippers to close it out in Game 5. And they were up 15 or 16 points or whatever the heck they were, and I went into dinner with my wife and another couple. And while we're at dinner, I didn't even pay attention to my phone. And then when dinner was over, I was like, oh, let me go ahead and check and see what happened. Clippers, I assume, went ahead and eliminated the Nuggets. And then they played again, if I'm not mistaken. They played Friday and they played Sunday. Well, nobody paid attention to Game 6 because it was taking place during all the NFL kickoff festivities. And so I think a lot of people were like, oh, wow, there's a Game 7 on Tuesday. And then they suddenly realized the Clippers were up against it, and the Clippers found a way to blow another double-digit lead, and they're done. And I think most of the time, we talked about this with Jason Whitlock on, Tuesday's edition of the show. And Whitlock said, look, if Doc Rivers loses Game 7, most of the time, given all the money that the Clippers spent and given all that they did to put that team together, most of the time the coach would get fired. I don't think Doc Rivers is going to get fired, but most of the time when you saw a situation like that develop, somebody would have to fall on the sword. And certainly Steve Ballmer is maybe they got the new arena that they're building, and there are a lot of reasons for overall optimism with the Clippers. But losing to the Lakers would have been acceptable. I wouldn't have been happy about it, but if you get to the NBA Finals, the Western Conference Finals, and you lose to the Lakers, I think people could have handled it. But losing after being up 3-1 to the Nuggets, there's going to be a lot of questions about what has to happen in order for things to change going forward.
Yeah. And to be fair, you didn't think that was going to happen. You had a futures ticket on the Clippers, right?
On the show. I did not have a futures ticket on the Clippers on the show. I think Sal did.
Gotcha.
But
at the beginning of the season, last summer, if we back it up, you thought the Clippers, after they pulled off the Paul George deal and got Kawhi, I remember you saying that they were playing chess while they kept the Lakers to checkers because the Lakers pretty much got the leftovers that were out there on the free agent market. And so we had to hear, as a Lakers fan all year, had to suffer through Marcellus Wiley, Cowherd, Bayless, Maller, sucking on the Clippers' toes, talking about how much their team, how much more depth and how the shooting and the defense, just overall, the Clippers had a much better team than the Lakers. And so the Lakers were in trouble if they got to the Western Conference Finals. I mean, that was the narrative
the Clippers are
all
better.
Year. They're not better.
They are. They
No,
lost.
they're not better.
They are. They have a more talented team than the Lakers do, but they lost. I mean, sometimes that happens, and that's why I'm saying if you are sitting back and you are Steve Ballmer, it's one thing if you lose when you are the inferior team. That's something that you can deal with, I think, much easier than when you lose and you have a superior team. And that's why when I'm sitting back and I'm saying, okay, what are the consequences of losing? Most of the time in this scenario, you would fire the head coach. I don't think that they're going to fire Doc Rivers, but if I'm Steve Ballmer, I have to look back and say maybe it's that the team didn't like each other. Maybe being inside of the bubble was bad for the Clippers. We talked about this when the NBA bubble started back in July, that ultimately team chemistry was going to be a huge part of it, and then answering the question who wanted to be there. Remember, the Clippers reportedly voted to leave the bubble along with the Lakers.
Yeah, well, the Lakers voted to leave too.
Yeah, I question that because I think that was an example of LeBron James being king of the wokes, and so because he didn't make the decision to cancel, refuse to play, that he had to look like he was more angry about being there than anybody else. So I
you're
don't
not
really
buying
buy
that
into
maybe
it.
the Clippers were just overrated.
No, I think the Clippers had the best team in the NBA, and I think they choked. And that's why I'm saying if I'm Steve Ballmer and I own the team, they had the best team in the NBA, and it didn't materialize on the court.
Yeah, they had the best team on paper. I remember you were at the opener.
Yeah, that's right. Back in October, which feels like 50 years ago.
And I remember you tweeting out that L.A. was now a Clippers town.
Yeah, I mean, they won.
No, it's never going to be a Clippers town.
They were the better team, and they found a way to lose. And that's why, again, if you are making an assessment on what the outcome is, if you're the owner of the Clippers like Steve Ballmer is, I don't know what the solution is because they've got they've got a lot of guys under contract. And usually, again, the head coach would have to fall on his sword, but I don't think he's going to fire Doc Rivers. And so I don't know what the solution is. I mean, again, I'm not trying to be dramatic. I don't really think there's anything the Clippers can do. They come back next season, and next season I think the Lakers with LeBron being 36 will be rotating down again. But the problem for the Clippers is there are a lot of teams that are going to be a lot better, right? I mean, this was an opportunity for them to get a title. I think it's the last chance for the Lakers to get a title too. And I just think ultimately, not only for the Clippers, but the NBA is going to be in a rough spot with the Lakers going up against the Nuggets, competing with all the better sports activities that are out there. I don't even think LeBron can save the NBA now. What about you, Dub? Your big takeaways at all from, I mean, and by the way, I think the Big Ten and the Pac-12 is arguably a bigger story right now than the Clippers, the ridiculousness that's going on in the Big Ten, the fact that Pac-12 players have suddenly woken up and realized that if they want to play in any way, they have to fight the battle to play, and how bad the Pac-12 is going to look eventually when the Big Ten announces that they are coming back and they're trying to compete for the college football playoff. The whole Pac-12 conference is just going to look ridiculous.
Well, I'll start with the NBA. The Clippers, Game 7, heading into the fourth quarter, down 8 points. Kawhi and Paul George in the fourth quarter combined for 0 points, and it was not because of lack of shooting.
Paul George put that shot off of the side of the backboard,
I mean,
which
that
is
was
that's the
insane.
one that wide open basically. That's the one that's going to linger for Paul George, which I think of all the players, Paul George is going to have the most to answer for because he likes to call himself playoff P or whatever else. And James Harden comes in for a lot of criticism because he hasn't won much. Russell Westbrook comes in for a lot of criticism. I think you're going to have to put Paul George into that combo right now. And by the way, aren't all three of those guys from L.A.? The three most failed in the postseason guys? Isn't Harden from L.A., Paul George from L.A., and Russell Westbrook all from L.A. basketball circles?
Well, Paul George is from Palmdale. So.
Yeah, right. But, I mean, that's for most people.
I guess you could say Southern California.
From the Inland Empire, or whatever you want to call it. But for most people, that's L.A. All three of them are the choke artists when it comes to the postseason, and they're all from the same place. And that's a high level of irony. But I just want to mention that shot off the side of the backboard, which to me kind of personifies the Clippers' performance in Game 7.
Yeah, almost every time Paul George shot the ball late in the game, I mean, even he didn't look like he was going in. No confidence whatsoever. But for the Pac-12, I mean, I'm surprised that they're making the late push. Great, but I mean, this is way too little, too late, in my opinion. I mean, this came out of nowhere yesterday. I saw the letter from USC, and I saw Matt Leinart retweeting it, trying to get some movement going there. But, I mean, to me, my expectations for the Pac-12 is they're not going to play a single game this year. This is way too late for them to make this push.
I think they're going to come back and not be able to compete for the for the college football playoff, which is going to look ridiculous because the Pac-12 is basically going to be playing by itself. And I don't think there are that many Pac-12 fans that care. That's the other thing. Some people said, well, why in the world did the Big Ten provoke all of the interest? Why did the White House get involved? It's because they fought for themselves, right? Some people in Pac-12 are like, well, the president didn't call to try to make us happen. Well, that's because you didn't fight for yourself. If you want people to line up behind you, you have to allow your voice to be heard. The Pac-12 players didn't speak out. The Pac-12 parents didn't speak out. The Pac-12 coaches didn't speak out. All of them just meekly accepted the shutdown of their conference without saying a word. And that's an indictment to me of the conference because the data and the medical didn't in any way support the decision that they made. What about you, Eddie Garcia? What stands out to you about breaking all this universe down?
Well, I think the Big Ten is finally coming to their senses, and they never should have done this to begin with. They should have waited, just like all the other major conferences did. So, I mean, I guess better late than never, but it was really a big waste of time and unnecessary for them to go through all this, in my opinion. As far as the Clippers go, I mean, what a complete gutless performance. In Game 7, you're the better team, you have the better roster, and you just completely wilt, and your two key players don't show up. I mean, I don't know what you do. Steve Ballmer certainly strikes me as a guy who's not going to just sit on his hands and not do something when he sees, that performance. So very disappointing. I was looking forward to a Lakers-Clippers matchup, but I'm not a big NBA fan now that it's Nuggets.
Are you with me that that's a disaster for the NBA? Like, nobody's going to care about Nuggets versus Lakers.
Probably, yeah, true. I would say, yeah. Everyone was already had predestined it was going to be LA versus LA, and now that it's not, with all due respect to the Nuggets, it's a pretty big letdown.